Today, we have the distinct honor of interviewing Ron Remy, the CEO of Mobile Heartbeat. How are you doing, Ron?
I'm doing good. It's wintertime here in Massachusetts, but it's about 45 degrees. So it's almost almost a swim day outside today.
So first, let me introduce Ron. Ron brings over 20 years of technology management leadership experience to Mobile Heartbeat. Previously, he was the president and CEO of Auspice Corporation, a developer of software in the cable broadband industry, and that was acquired by Arris. This is the part I like because it hits home for me. But when Ron began his career as an engineer for Sun Microsystems, I have some intersection with Sun, a commonality in our past. And you hold a BS in electrical engineering from Brown University and an MBA from Harvard. In particular, what I like is a similar path that I've had to take. Was more technology driven and of course more business focused as in my current role as CEO of Clinical Mobility. So the goal of today, Ron, we'd like to hear your perspective as a healthcare industry veteran and as CEO of a successful software platform that deals with some of the most critical parts of patient workflow. I'd like people to understand what's involved and what are the biggest challenges in deploying these technologies, and ultimately your vision and perspective over where it's headed. Ron, can you define the CC&C category, clinical communications and collaboration?
Yeah, I think I can. And I'll define it as a subset of a bigger initiative called, it's your company name, basically, it's Clinical Mobility. And Clinical Mobility is providing all of the tools and infrastructure for clinicians who are the most mobile workers, most highly trained, most valuable mobile workers on the planet, and providing them with the mobility capabilities that they've never had before. So now let's take that down to what we do, clinical communication collaboration. This is generally, it's a subset of clinical mobility, and it's generally the first subset that a healthcare organization looks at. It's basically taking smartphones, which are obviously mobile devices, and allowing the staff to utilize some communication software to both interact with one another via text, secure text, via video, via audio, but also to receive alerts and alarms around patients. And it's all organized as the patient as the center of interest. It's center of interest. It's the patient is the context, because most healthcare organizations are team-based with the patient as the center of the team. So that's how I would explain it. Yep. And again, we are a subset. So the subset being, we're the first application software that gets put in place, big infrastructure requirement, and then other clinical applications get layered on. So you're building a mobility program. So what you do is a subset of the CC&C space.
So Ron, let's talk about the role of EMRs, EHRs, and what they do well and what they're, and from my perspective, trying to do more of. Of course, you've seen the changes like I have, and they've allowed us to go from paper records to really digital health and able to do more with that data. So I can't help to wonder, when I've seen where EMRs have gone and where they've kind of plateaued and matured, yes, you see evolution, right? But nothing transformative. I can't help to think, when I see the impact of clinical communications being deployed in customer environments and what it does to patient workflow, do you think that is maybe the next big strategic thing, past EMRs and EHRs?
I like to think of it as the extension of lean technology and lean thinking into healthcare. The lean world came out of the automotive industry many, many years ago, of trying to reduce friction. Every operation that has friction in it, you should look at how to make it go faster. And if you think about a healthcare setting, you've got an awful lot of friction in the setting. Discharging a patient takes a huge amount of effort. Getting a question answered by another staff member who may not be next to you takes a lot of effort. So if you think about what the CC&C, that's clinical communication collaboration market and technology does, is it helps a healthcare organization put some lean thinking into practice, puts lean techniques into practice. I need a question answered around a patient's care. I can instantly see who's available on my team to answer that question. I can text them, which is asynchronous, instead of calling them and interrupting them. So that's really where CC&C is making an impact. But I will kind of do a little future shading for you. That is all present day. I'd like to think that we're going to help the clinicians figure out what to do next. The data that we produce, we're going to figure out what they need to do next, because a clinician is faced with immediate needs and then being efficient about what they do next. If we can help them figure out what's next up, it will have an even bigger impact. Okay,
you talk about leveraging AI and ML. So yes, like digital assistants, right? Leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning, or AI, ML, as we call it. Boy, this is such a practical use of that technology. So let's talk about a practical example of that. In nursing departments, if I'm a nurse, I'm assigned to, let's say, these 4 rooms, maybe 6 rooms, and then as the primary nurse for that role, but then I'm maybe secondary, the backup, if you will, to another set of rooms. And I may be administering medications to a patient, and there could be a nurse call event happening in another room, or a backup event I have to respond to. So there's a constant interruptions. Boy, would there be some advantages to leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning, or any kind of way to harvest that data to reduce the noise and suppression of the shirt tugs on the clinicians, to allow them to do the job more effectively and efficiently and safely. And there's another way to look at it.
So this is a story that hasn't seen the light of day many times, but the technology team that was here doing this even before me. So they started with technology earlier than I joined the company. I joined about a year after they had started it. And we all came out of all things, the retail market. And we were building systems to help shoppers in grocery stores. Automated
shoppers,
shoppers,
not the staff.
Shoppers,
okay.
Yeah. So we were building the kiosks in the deli department and the automated checkout, handheld automated checkout technology. So we knew wireless, which is a big part of what we do, and the challenges of a wireless environment that is incredibly noisy and incredibly fraught with danger. We knew mobile applications being on handhelds, not on smartphones at that point in time. And we knew scale. When we were first asked, we need to scale up to 150 hospitals. Can you guys do that? And our answer was, well, our last customer had 400 stores that we scaled up to. So that's less than half of what we've done last time we did this together. But the real critical part of this is that the team looked at smartphones being available, and they looked at healthcare, and they realized that if we could get smartphones in the hands of clinicians with something on it of value, there was a market for it. And their first foray into this, now this one is a real great story of mobile heartbeat. The first product was on Nokia phones in the National Health Service in the UK. So we had an implementation team in the UK. All the development was done here in Massachusetts. And it was to help physicians do workflow.
So wait, let me get this right. You're talking about the Nokia phones with the T9 keyboard and that era of technology. Wow, that's fantastic. Boy, if you can dig up a photo of that someday, we'd love to put it in the video if you end up coming up with one.
We'll see what we can do, but it was in Warwick Hospital in the UK. We realized pretty quickly, I got involved right around that time, that it was the wrong device, the wrong market, and the wrong use case. But there was a real opportunity for smartphone usage in acute care settings in the US. So we basically retooled the product. And we started off in the fall of 2011 with a small rural hospital in Connecticut piloting our product. And then we got engaged with Yale New Haven Health System, with the CMIO down there, Dr. Alan Shao, who was truly a visionary. And I'd say about 40 to 50% of the clinical thinking in our product came out of his mind. Every week he would put a new idea in front of us, and then we would implement it and we would try it out down in the ED department at Yale, and we'd see what was sticky and what they didn't like. And that's how the product got actually built. It was in conjunction with a customer.
Okay. Ron, I have to tell you a story. Goes back to when you and I originally met years ago. I was working for a large healthcare organization, and I was trying to drive clinical communications out into, adoption. And these were the early days. And we were investigating, testing, maybe piloting with the well-known vendors at the time in your space. And then along comes this company called Mobile Heartbeat. I'm like, I haven't heard of Mobile Heartbeat. And boy, did you make a splash on the scene. You went from this total unknown company to being not just, sure, we get newcomers that enter a market all the time, but not the way you did. You introduced a product that was pretty darn mature. And it was like, I had conversations with some of my peers at other organizations that were, trying to push this, move this ball downfield too. And they were all shocked, like I was. Like, you really came out, had all this R&D and went, ta-da.
Well, we not only had a lot of R&D done, but we had a fantastic forward-thinking customer that was plying us with new ideas constantly. And they were thoughtful ideas. They weren't, outer space ideas. They were really thoughtful. Hey, if you had this would be a big thing. A couple big breakthroughs that came out of that. One is the concept of presence. It's pretty obvious now. You're on Slack or any shared messaging platform. You know what presence is. Is somebody available or not? Well, on a smartphone in a clinical setting, knowing who's busy on a phone call, who's in the hospital, who's available was a breakthrough back in the day.
Yes.
That was a big deal. And then the second big breakthrough out of Yale is the concept of dynamic roles. You need to reach somebody. You may not know them by name, but you may know what role they're in. You may need to reach the cardiac surgeon on call. And a big facility like Yale, you may not know that individual. You look on your phone, like, what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to search for the cardiac surgeon on call. And we dynamically route all the messages to that individual. That was what we thought was an interesting little sidelight to our product. And it became one of the major features of it.
I want to double down on that comment. For those of you that aren't familiar with clinical workflow, maybe you're a little bit more on the IT side or aren't a clinician yourself. What Ron just talked about is what I call the clinician database. It's really more than that, but it addresses all of the roles involved in clinical workflow. And there isn't a PBX on the planet. What I mean by that, that's like your typical telephony system that's used in a hospital. There isn't a call center solution that sits on top of it or anything to address the type of workflow. And let me give you an example. Using the same example, when a nurse is assigned to a room. When I'm assigned to a room, that's I may be nurse primary for room 501, room 501 through 505. And so that's a role, nurse primary 501, nurse primary 502. And you go into the nurse call system and you would make an assignment. So anytime that nurse call event happens, it goes to that role. And that's done once. In the modern era, with a clinician database or a clinical database like this, you do that programming once. You just have people that float in and out of those roles. And then with a product like yours, you ensure that you make sure there's somebody's always assigned to that role, and you make sure it's delivered on time. And it's important for the IT departments to understand this. There is a strong business need and value for this clinician database function that exists. So we often deal with the IT folks that when we're deploying, so one half of the group that we're dealing with are the clinician audiences and deploying these devices. But the IT folks often say, well, Sean, we already have a PBX. And in fact, maybe the call center solution that we've deployed could do some of this. When they tell you that, Ron, or when you hear that, what do you tell them?
Well, the first thing we tell them is that you got to actually understand what the clinician is facing, the problems they're facing. They're not IT problems in the most part. They're workflow problems, and they're organizational problems, and they're staffing issues. And if technology can, again, back to the lean thinking aspect, get some friction out of and take friction out of those, it's valuable technology. If it's just technology for technology's sake because it's cool, it's not going to go very far. It may look great. And we've got great examples of technology that look great, but when you actually put it into deployment and users, our founder, Jack Mark, he used to call it use it in anger. You put something in someone's hands and they use it in anger, then you find out what works and what doesn't. And when he says use it in anger, he means if it doesn't work, they take the smartphone and throw it against the wall because they're actually making their job harder.
That is a fascinating type of role-playing experiment. Yes, I love it.
Yep.
So Ron, when you started Mobile Heartbeat, has the original problem changed to what it is today?
No, it's actually gotten worse. And the need for what we do and others in the CC&C market, it's hitting mainstream and it's gotten worse. You've got way shorter duration of employment periods for staff, particularly nursing staff. They're turning over constantly. The pandemic's made it worse instead of better. So being able to communicate seamlessly with a team of people that you may not know that well, and you can't even identify them sometimes on site, but can pick up a smartphone and instantly communicate with them to get something done or information passed or a question answered, it's become more and more critical. The pandemic has actually made the demand for our market stronger because of the challenge of people. The people challenges in healthcare are really big right now.
So Ron, I agree. And I'd like to share my perspective on this. EMRs, I would argue, are designed to solve a different set of things than clinical communication products are. I would argue that the problems that EMR solve and what clinical communications products solve are two very different things, yet there's some shared functionality between them. We hear more and more that organizations think that, well, hey, in my EMR app, there's a chatting function. We're just going to use this. We don't need a separate solution for this. When you hear that, what do you say to them?
Yeah, chat functionality is readily available, and it's been available since the earliest days in this market. When we first got started, there were, 30 competitors in the space, many of whom were started at academic medical centers of 2 doctors. I don't know why it was always 2. It was never 1, it was never 3, but it was 2 doctors that built a secure texting product, and they got folks in that hospital to adopt it. And they've all disappeared over the last 5 years. And the reason is that secure texting is only one component to the problem. Secure texting gives you the ability to send an asynchronous message between 2 end users. That's great. And asynchronous messages are super important. But sometimes you need a synchronous message. Sometimes you need a phone call or a video call. Sometimes
the modality of the communication is
correct.
So important.
That's right. So
and the higher acuity, would you agree, it kind of moves up the chain, right?
Correct.
From texting, wait, let's get on the phone and talk. Wait, let's go to, yeah.
Correct. And having a voice call that is seamless and high quality inside a healthcare setting, as you know from your work at Clinical Mobility, it's a supreme challenge. And
it's a science project.
It is. Yes. It's a total science project. And we can go deep into, why voice over IP is a challenge in a hospital and what happens when you've got not enough access points and too many access points. But the bottom line is that you've got a modality of communication that's absolutely critical here. Let me grab my phone off here. Sorry about that. You've got a modality of communication that's critical, that is synchronous, when you need to reach somebody right now. And you need to know if they're available before you start calling and getting a busy signal. You want to look down at the phone and make sure that who you're trying to reach is available. You also want to be able to react to alerts and alarms from other systems throughout the facility. And my wife has this great concept of so what, now what? And that concept is a hospital has tons of systems that create so what events. So what, this patient is just went critical. So what, there's a meeting in the break room for all staff in 5 minutes. It's the now what. Now what do you do with that information that's important? So the so what is created all over the hospital. You've got to get that information down to the clinician that actually needs to take action, and that clinician then needs to take action. So we always look at problems as a so what. Now what do we do with that information? So what? That's information. Is that critical? Yes, it is. Now what do we do with that? And that's why you see this market expanding. It's not just chat. It's taking the so what information and allowing a clinician to take action on it.
Yeah, I remember when the National Patient Safety Goal, I believe it's 06, 01, 01, for whatever reason I remember, but that is NPSG is in short. It came out and they were addressing alarm fatigue. And alarm fatigue is a serious event or a serious problem that clinicians were facing. And much like, some of you that may be more on the IT side, and we'll talk about a clinical example. When you have a network monitoring tool and you get this, you're excited about it, you turn on all the alerts and alarms, and then you look down at your laptop, phone, whatever, and you see just way too many events. The one that you care about, could be at line number 52, but that gets lost. And it's a severe risk to clinicians when you inundate them with information. Let's say all these nurse call events, or it's broadcast to too many people. You want to get to the right person under the right context and address into your goal in deploying these kinds of solutions that have the capability of doing alerts and alarms. Your goal, I would argue, is to make sure it's the right thing that you're alerting them on, but it's to suppress all of the stuff that you don't want them to be inundated with.
So if I were to take that lesson from monitoring and apply it to CC&C, the one thing I would do if I was a hospital is make sure you had someone in the role of what we call the alarm czar. And the alarm czar sets hospital policies on what messages go down to the phones. And when you add a new capability, when you add a new alarming system into your CC&C platform, the rules of those alerts and alarms are critical. And that's not just who they go to, but how quickly they escalate, what level of urgency they have. And unsuccessful, we've seen facilities where every service line gets really excited about sending their alerts and alarms to predominantly the clinical staff taking care of patients. But they believe theirs are so important that there's no filtering on them whatsoever. So literally every single alarm goes down to the end user without any filtering. And it's just horrible to watch. We're really proud of our technology to help solve alarm fatigue. In this case, it's the inverse. We're actually making it worse because every alarm is going to everybody. It's escalating really, really quickly. I watched a nurse on a 5-minute phone call get interrupted 6 times with patient alarms that should have been routed, maybe not even to anyone. It was a patient pulling a bathroom alert. That could be delayed. That's not something that probably is instantaneous, but to have them all go to the entire nursing staff on the floor all the time, it was awful, totally awful.
I'd like to double down on that. The alarm czar is, I completely agree with you. And I see organizations that may want to put in a project manager, a facilitator, if you will, around this role. And it is exactly the opposite, in my opinion. It's exactly the opposite type of personality profile that you need. And I'd love to know your thoughts on this, but it's a role you have to make big decisions on, and you have to see through the ramifications. So cause and effect. If we allow this, let's understand the ramifications of what's that look like. It's kind of like you need kind of a bulldog for this. Do you agree?
They have to be a bulldog, and they have to be able to understand trade-offs.
Yeah.
And, look at the problem that they're trying to solve. They're trying to get the most important information in the hands of the end users as effectively as possible. And that means filtering out and saying no to, we'll call it alarm spam. It's the only other way to say it.
Yes.
It's alarm spam. But you also don't want to, completely restrict everything from going to the end user. So it requires medical judgment clinical judgment, an understanding of your organization. And it also is not static, it's dynamic. Things change.
Yes.
You know, your policies in COVID may be different than your policies pre and post COVID, and you need to change those. And the system has to be flexible to work with you, not against you.
I completely agree. EMRs, will evolve, but there's areas for innovation that I would argue smaller, more nimble companies are more equipped to take advantage of. So two of the things that we've seen such an emergence and a growing need for is virtual rounding and virtual observations. So virtual rounding, it's where a physician is doing rounding to check on their patients, and they have to go in the patient room. Well, if I can do that, you still may do that, but can you do more of it with you in virtual rounding with quick check-ins? Do all of your rounding in a shorter period of time, see the patients more frequently, increase patient satisfaction. The other one is around virtual observations, where you may have a highly infectious patient in a room, and you need to observe them, maybe even have two-way audio and video there, but you could do it certainly with just audio or in one-way video. But there's a specific set of functionality that's needed around there. And COVID has certainly not just, it may have introduced this in some cases, but most of the time have accelerated these needs. So what are your thoughts about the evolution of EMR vendors and how they may or may not adopt CC&C functionality or clinical communications functionality?
Let's actually look at the EMR space as a separate space first. We'll come back to CC&C in a second, but the EMR world was really accelerated with meaningful use. Obviously, it was a must-have for every hospital. And if you look at when the real strength of EMR deployments and the bulk of them took place, starting about 15 years ago to about 2 to 3 years ago, it was how quickly can I get this in place and transition my current IT footprint over to the EMR platform. There was no move to the cloud, even though cloud computing was available. No one was really focused on the cloud.
The ASP market maybe is what it was called back then.
Yeah, exactly. No one was really focused on that. They were focused on getting an EMR up and running as quickly as possible and getting their staff moved over to it. I mean, if you interview clinicians, and this isn't universal, but their satisfaction with having to use an EMR, I don't think is extremely high. And there are a lot of barriers to entry for a new entrant, but I'm a serial entrepreneur. And at some point in time, someone is going to come out with a breakthrough concept using latest technologies, using cloud technologies, using machine learning to help people navigate the various screens that they've got to go through to work in EMR. Yes. And they're going to put a EMR Lite in place that is going to solve 80% of the problems that the current bulky EMR solve, and it's going to be a great company.
Yeah, healthcare is sort of known for Stone Age technology that's being used today, and which is what all of the EMR products, not all, but 80-20 rule, right? It's all of the popular ones are built on. And yet in cloud, we have a modern compute architecture that so many aspects of it have changed, and there's a massive market opportunity for creating a new EMR. And you've, much like I have probably had people that have tapped you on the shoulder, "Hey, Sean," or "Hey, Ron, I'm thinking about developing a new EMR because these ones, negative comments would be listed." New technology, cloud, more resilient architecture, all kinds of new compute constructs that didn't exist before. So there's absolutely a big market opportunity for that, but it's important to here's another. So decision makers within hospitals, they're largely, as a collective group, are very risk averse. I think you can stereotype all healthcare delivery organizations as risk averse. I would argue that's good. But it's also tough to get those first couple of customers that would adopt the new EMR product. So perhaps starting them in clinics would be a good way to start.
Could be. I mean, one of the big challenges in healthcare software, and particularly acute care hospital software, is we're rebuilding our product, moving it from on-premises to the cloud. We are doing a brand new refactoring of all the different modules to it. We're using modern frameworks. And why are we doing this? Well, the mainstream market is accepting CC&C, but we've been at it 10 years, as have all of our competitors. In 10 years in enterprise software, that's getting to end of life. You've got to rebuild it. So we've got this dynamic where you don't hit major market adoption for 10 years, but that's when enterprise software needs to be rewritten. So you've got two things happening simultaneously that you got to manage, and it's non-trivial. It really is difficult.
Yes, I call that technical debt. It's you're forced to have almost two different teams, maintaining two different branches of technology, and there's, along with that, there's incredible complications, downstream effects that feature parity, differences between them, et cetera. So Ron, let's shift gears for a minute. As a serial entrepreneur and CEO of Mobile Heartbeat, you have some good examples from not just this organization, but previous. When you're starting a new organization and introducing a new product to the marketplace, what's the hardest part that you dealt with?
Well, early stage, when you're building brand new technology, you're working with a pilot site, and maybe you've got your first big customer, there is no safety net. There is no, well, if this doesn't work, we'll try something else, because you don't get a second chance. Your big customer just drops you immediately and moves on, and you're done at that point. So there were many days when we were there late at night with a bug in our product or a problem that we created, and we had the company on the line. And, the one story I tell is we had our first large customer. It's my current parent company, HCA, and we had 3 hospitals live, and everybody was loving the product. And then we did an upgrade of our software, and simultaneously they upgraded iOS. This is a shop that uses predominantly iOS smartphones, and it went swimmingly the first day. And then the second day, users could not log in to the system to make phone calls or to get alerts and alarms. The texting function worked, but voice did not work at all.
Ouch. Yes, that's a rough
second day, not the first day, but the second day. And we're thinking, you always think it can't be us.
It's not us. It's always right. Immediately do this.
Exactly. Some networking engineer changed the giant Cisco plant and made a change, maybe, added a firewall rule, who knows? And now that causes us to have a problem of logging in. We were up, God knows how long, looking at this, and realized in the middle of the night that we created the problem. And the problem was that we had a bug in our code that had been there since the first iteration of our product, and this is 3 years into it. And the iOS upgrade actually made that bug apparent. The latest version of iOS made this bug apparent, and the bug would not allow us to log out. You could log in. That's why the first day it worked great. Yeah. And then no one could log out. So they went to log in the second day. When they came back for their shift the next day, they were already logged in on another phone. So it wouldn't allow them to log in. I mean, it was, and we're sitting there looking at one another. There's 14 of us in the company at that point in time going, well, we don't solve this problem, we can all go home, because this will be our last day working here together. But that's what entrepreneurism is like. There's no safety net. It's really, got to get it done one way or another, because there is no alternative.
I love it. Now that you've been acquired by HCA, what has the hardest part changed at all for you?
Oh, it's different that I don't have to lose sleep at night wondering whether or not we're done as a technology company tomorrow. I mean, our technology is now in the hands of 250,000 end users and a large number of facilities. The big difference now is to figure out what's next. The technology is almost fully deployed at HCA. We've got some great new customers coming on board, but technology companies like ours, you can never sleep and rest on your laurels. You've got to be figuring out what's next. And it's really easy as a startup. It's a lot harder as a accepted company, because you can't just immediately move on to what's next. You got to keep your customers happy.
I totally agree. Let's talk about that for a minute, because when I look at cloud, there's it's a major shift, and your product effectively needs to get rewritten in a lot of ways to harness the real true power of the cloud. What's cloud force you to do differently in your product, or what opportunities is it creating for you to or what opportunities is it creating for your product?
Well, the biggest is that, this is a CC&C product like ours is a high availability, absolutely required product once it gets up and running. You get it deployed everywhere and people can't live without it.
Yes.
But it's on premises. It's on premise.
Has to be high availability.
Yep. And anytime you do an upgrade, anytime you do a patch, you are likely going to have to take the system down at some point. And we've minimized the amount of time we've had to take it down to deploy. And you've got a deployment team or a service team that's got to deal with every single customer. So we come out with, we've got a large number of hospitals that use our product. We've got to get every single one up on a new release. Where you move into the cloud and you take care of that by implementing in the cloud, and everybody gets the new release instantaneously. That's a giant, giant savings of both time, cost, but also potential errors with your clients. Somebody fat fingers in the patch process. At 2 o'clock in the morning they fat finger something, and you're down for 4 hours. Yeah. That is not a good thing. So that's going to be a big change for us as we get our clients into the cloud.
So that's a great part about cloud. And I'd love to know your perspective on how it's allowed you to be able to respond to external events. And I'll be specific. That could be a network infrastructure change, or maybe there's a major upgrade or a software version variant that had some cause and effect relationship. It could be a device that had a new update. And I'll put this into perspective where I'm coming from. As clinical mobility in our business, there's a graphic that we use to talk to customers about, where we have this graphic that has a cloud on the left with this swirling spaghetti, and it's designed to look like chaos, right? Where there's all of these technology standards and acronyms and security aspects and all of these things you have to grapple with as a designer, as a company, as a hospital system. And yet all you care about is deploying a solution to your customers. All you care about is deploying a solution to your customers. There's all of this in the middle, right? That is particularly where our expertise comes in. But how has cloud removed some of that chaos? Or how can it remove some of that chaos for your customers?
Well, in theory, and again, we're not up in the cloud in any scale. In theory, it should make us much more. We can roll forward and roll back faster, so we can test against changes. But we should be able to, in theory, respond much quicker when things don't go the right way.
I agree.
Now, you're going to have to stay tuned for that one, though, because we don't have any proof points quite yet. We're not up there at scale in any way.
Yeah, I want people to hear that. Again, this is one of the items clearly in the benefit column, for cloud. There's the technical debt in a different form. Let's think about what happens when people have deployed your software. They've put them on hospital A, hospital B, hospital C. These are called autonomous deployments. Like, these are not managed by a central control point or management point. And the ramifications of your R&D team and quality assurance team to do new innovation, to help customers solve their problems and give them what they're asking for, but yet you have all of these deployments out there. That's maybe from a point of view, from your perspective, of this technical debt concept that we have floated around a couple of ways. So cloud allows you to respond to managing out some of that technical debt for you as well, right?
Correct. We like to refer to technical debt as tribal knowledge as opposed to technical debt, because that sounds, way too efficient. But when you think about 10 years of building technology, you're building a lot of tribal knowledge into it.
Yes.
And not all of it is fully documented. There's just no way to do it, particularly when you're fast and nimble. So you want to reduce the amount of tribal knowledge when you rebuild. You want to be more structured, use the latest frameworks, document better. You always want to document better, but you really want to take some of this. The tech debt is what I refer to as tribal knowledge. You want to take that out of your next gen system as much as you can.
I like it. I like it. I'd like to give a spin on this. Design decisions are often a thoughtful set of trade-offs that you have to make. And for one design decision that you make may have some negative consequences and vice versa. And it's about, it really comes down to minimizing trade-offs. But from a cloud perspective, you talked about uptime being super important and how the uptime requirement is critical for how your clinicians are going to communicate using a product like yours. I would put cloud into the risk column by moving a CC&C product to the cloud fully. I would put that into the risk column when it comes to high availability, that is. So let me ask you, what advice would you give customers when adopting a cloud solution, and what should they ask for?
Well, I think the first thing is they've got to build a little bit of experience with the cloud, with smaller scale projects before they go to something as ubiquitous as CC&C. I mean, one of the real powers of CC&C is that it should be everywhere in your facility. The value of a CC&C network is to have as many people on it as possible.
Yeah, it's not just one unit. I mean,
Correct.
it's not just clinicians. It's we talked about EVS to
Yep.
Facilities people. Yeah.
Yep. It should be wall to wall and then some. It should wall to wall and then some. It should go out to the helipad. It should go out to the ambulances. So if your first foray into the cloud is your CC&C platform, that's pretty risky. So what I would do is I would put some smaller scale products up first to get some experience before I would deploy anything at this size and scale. That would be my one piece of advice. And my second piece of advice is it's going to take some different thinking from your IT staff, but also it's exciting for them. It's new technology. Cloud technology allows them to build new skills. So make sure they've got an opportunity to get their skills improved, get the training, get the help when needed, so that they've got folks to, the user group to get engaged with, the help forum to get engaged with, because you're going to take your staff into a brave new world. Many of them will go kicking and screaming.
Yes.
The ones that don't are the ones that are going to rise to the top, because they realize that that's the future and they want to keep their skills fresh. Technologists don't want to be stale for the most part.
Yeah. All right, we're getting towards the end of this. I'd like to learn more about you. What do you do for fun?
It's winter here in Massachusetts, and after we're done here this evening, I'm going to go out from 7:30 to 10 tonight, and I'm going to play a sport that many of your readers have probably never heard of before. It's officially known as platform tennis. It can also be known as paddle tennis, and it's an outdoor sport, pretty much doubles only, played on a tennis court looking court that's raised above the ground with a screen, a 12-foot high screen around the outside of it. It's called platform tennis because it's raised on a platform with heaters underneath, so you can melt the ice and snow off. Was invented in the 1930s in suburban New York City. It was a big Northeastern, Midwestern, upper Midwestern sport up until about 20 years ago, and now it's taken off and going everywhere. But it gives racket sport players a reason to be outside in the wintertime. And it's very social, but it's also really competitive. And I've been playing for almost 30 years now. And my winter, I ski, but my winter, you can't ski every day, but this you can go over and play an hour and a half in the middle of the winter and have a great time.
I'd like to pause for a second, because you get an idea when somebody's really into something when they go into the history of it.
Yeah. You got to know the history.
I love it.
Right.
Ron, COVID has changed, and how we work today has changed in so many ways. What is your travel like? How has COVID changed that? And what are you specifically looking forward to?
March of 2020, I'm looking at my travel calendar and I'm never going to be home. I mean, I'm really kind of burnt out of travel. And on March the 13th, we shut the office down, went work from home, and literally everything got canceled. If you remember back then, HIMSS was going to happen in last week, and thank God that was canceled. So went nowhere. From someone who traveled pretty much once a week to zero, the first 6 weeks were fantastic. I mean, I really, really appreciated being able to catch up, get some things done around the house. I did house projects left and right. And then I got antsy. It started to really get to me. So in October of 2020, before the vaccines were out, we were doing a deployment at a large facility, a large network, and we were taking volunteers of people that wanted to travel and to do this. You got to be on site. You know, hospitals are on site every day, their staff's on site. Exactly. So we traveled and without being vaccinated, you know, being masked up, and it was risky, but it actually felt good. And once I was vaccinated, which was quite early, I got back on the travel schedule pretty heavily, going out and seeing customers I hadn't seen in a long time. Yeah, I still travel pretty extensively. I can tell you that April and May of last year was the most awesome time to travel in the history of the planet because no one was in the airport or on the plane.
Yeah, I took photos. I was also afraid of sending engineers on site when COVID was at its initial climb. We didn't know. We had a customer in a children's hospital, and they had a problem that was affecting clinical workflow, and it was clear we had to send somebody on site. I was absolutely not ready to do that, to send somebody on site. So I went, but the point is, you know, I got the chance to travel during this time. And I remember going into Oakland Airport. It was super early flight in the morning. Sometimes you pick a day and there could be light, and I kind of expected it to be light, which it was. But there were people on the plane, I think a total of 11, by the way. Well, anyway, we landed at Denver Airport, and this was around like 11 a.m. So for those of you who haven't flown through Denver Airport, it's a major hub, and there's always a flurry of activity around 11 a.m. I remember getting off the plane, looking down to the left and looking down to the right, and I could have rolled a bowling ball down through the entire terminal and never hit anybody. Yeah, I took pictures of that. That was wild. So Ron, I understand you're a golf fan.
I am. You know, living in New England, you have to relearn the game again every year. So
I do every time I go on the course.
Exactly. I do enjoy playing. I'm a big fan of the history of the sport. And where I live in Massachusetts, we've got the US Open right around the corner from where I live next year. So it should be a pretty exciting time. But remember, our golf season starts when the snow melts till the snow flies. That's our golf season. And what's interesting from a global warming standpoint is it's starting later, but it's lasting later every year. So it's staying, you know, kind of cold and miserable later in the year, but it's staying warmer and well into, you know, past Thanksgiving and into December. So maybe golf is a predecessor for a global climate change. Who knows?
And there you go.
Yeah.
So Ron, one last thing I'd like to ask you. What's on your immediate horizon? What are you coming out with in your product line? Tell us about it.
Sure. So the first is obviously we're rebuilding the platform. It's called Banyan. It's cloud first. And we're not doing it on our own. We are doing it in conjunction with Microsoft. So it's going to be in Azure, one of the major cloud services. But most importantly is the messaging engine that will be driving our new product is going to be built on top of Azure Communication Services. It's the same messaging engine that powers Microsoft Teams. So we're taking the Teams engine and adding the clinical components that are critical to that with Microsoft's help. When we're done with this, we will have a seamless integration to Microsoft Teams. So that doesn't sound all that interesting on the surface, but think about it for a second. We talked earlier about the value of your network is the number of nodes, and getting everybody on the network working seamlessly is your goal. Everybody today, for a mobile heartbeat end user or any of our competitors, have to be on their clinical application. It's overkill for some users. You know, a unit secretary does not need a full-blown clinical application to communicate. They are better off with a horizontal application, something like Microsoft Teams. What this will allow us to do is clinicians will have our product Banyan. available on their desktop, on their smartphone, and be able to communicate with anyone that's a non-Banyan user, but has Microsoft Teams. And what this does, Sean, frankly, is to take the silo of CC&C and breaks the silo. It enables us to break out of just clinical opportunities and get everybody communicating. It's a big change.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Data silos are so prevalent. I like how Teams will give you a reach into people that are already using it, that may not be using a clinical communications product or license for it. Right? If they're on Teams, a unit secretary or somebody coordinating people. So you likely have customers that have adopted Teams. Are you running into that a lot?
That is very true. It's there. It's prevalent and it's growing, and for good reason. It's got value. And we want to make sure that we're the clinical front end to Teams, where we are seamlessly working with Teams users to communicate.
It gives you a reach into a whole bunch of folks that are involved in a clinical workflow and how hospitals operate, and even facility assets, so that's fantastic. So there you have it, Ron Remy, CEO of Mobile Heartbeat. Ron, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us today, and very much look forward to the next time I could see you in person. Thank you.
Take care, Sean. Bye-bye.